Hello everybody, I recently played Grounded with some of my friends and we had a great time.
You want to go in and look at it?
No, because there's probably like
Just chill.
Bruce stuff.
Bruce, what are you doing? Bruce, what are you doing? We didn't bring bandages. You didn't bring armor.
What do you mean I didn't bring armor? I've got armor.
No armor.
Right now, listeners aren't armed.
What do you mean? I got armor. Look at me, I'm wearing armor.
No, I don't even want to look at you anymore.
And since the recently announced sequel is entering early access in less than a month, I wanted to give you some of my hopes and dreams for Grounded 2. Grounded is a great game. It has a distinct identity, character, and style that sets it apart from other survival experiences. The incredible contrast between day and night, day inviting jolly exploration with your friends, and night producing a thick air of danger and mystery, rivaling some of my favorite horror classics. Or the incredible way the grass bends as giant creatures emerge from the unknown. The nostalgic 90s atmosphere, or the way it takes a backyard, something familiar to most people, and warps it into something alien and unfamiliar. However, Grounded 1 is not a flawless masterpiece. I actually think it's quite flawed and has lots of room to grow and improve. Grounded 2 can do exactly this. Grounded 1's combat was a lot of fun, but in a lot of ways it felt too limited for a game so heavily focused on exploration and making a home in an unfamiliar world. So much about the game rewards player expression and developing your very personal way of surviving, yet the combat really doesn't. At least not for the bulk of the game, but more on that later. The game very clearly wants you to parry enemy attacks, and anything else seems almost insignificant. On harder difficulties, it's nearly impossible to succeed by any other means. Enemies track the player so aggressively that positioning barely matters. Attacks don't even have to properly connect with your child to hit. Instead of aiming for you, it feels like enemies attack a glass plane in front of your character. The strong elemental weaknesses force you to favor certain weapons, limiting an already limited item pool. Ranged options are sparse, and blocking is bypassed by several enemy attacks. The bulk of the game consists of you either learning to parry or out-healing enemies, and the latter is a pretty lame way to win a fight. It clashes with the focus on guided, yet free-form exploration. This gets mitigated somewhat in the last third of the game, as higher tier weapons and armor offer more interesting benefits, effects, and far more distinct designs, which allow you to scrap together some very cool builds that actually match your preferred playstyle. Unfortunately, until you reach that point far into the game, you'll be confined to very basic equipment made from primitive materials, while at the same time your base can already be a sprawling mansion. But even once you reach that point, a lot of the more interesting builds just don't feel good. Candy staffs, for example, looked incredibly exciting to me, but after finally acquiring the materials to get them, they just felt underwhelming. Their design felt confused. The spicy staff shoots an explosive charge, the sour staff a slow floating orb with arching electricity, and the fresh staff a cold breeze that feels especially unsatisfying to use. The extreme lack of impact makes it feel like you're merely breathing in an enemy's face. The spicy staff probably feels the best, but that doesn't matter much when the game's extreme focus on elemental weaknesses and huge risk for friendly fire make it a bad option in the majority of situations. The only staff that really feels fun to use isn't really all that useful. With only 3 staffs in the game, and all of them being unlocked at the same time very late, it results in them not even really feeling like a proper part of the game's progression, but rather a fun toy for the post-game, sort of like the Master Cycle Zero in Nintendo's 2017 Zelda disaster. Unfortunately, a lot of the cool final tier options share the same fate. Grounded 2 really needs to integrate fun options much more seamlessly into its progression. Interesting Tier 1 options need to be replaced by more interesting Tier 2 options. I would almost enjoy if they just started Grounded 2 at Tier 3 and iterated from there. Magic needs to feel like much less of a last-minute inclusion and have much broader use cases. Perhaps by letting the player customize the spells in some way, mix and match elements and spell types. Luckily, it appears that Grounded 2 will do just that, as in this early part of the game, they've already mentioned leaning into clear and distinct playstyles. They've shown off personal builds, more interesting magic, and new mechanics that should hopefully diversify the combat. I only hope there's enough equipment to match. Ideally, with better combat come great fights, an area that Grounded 1 somehow both excelled and struggled in. It absolutely did have great bosses, but unfortunately most of them weren't part of the main story. The bosses that were part of the story were a mix of too easy and lame. Stacks of basic enemies slapped into a tiny room, enemy spam, or cool ideas that never quite reached their climax. The greatest bosses in the game were tucked away in secret areas slightly out the player's path. These not only looked fantastic and were mechanically interesting, but also a lot of fun to fight. They proved the dev team can make great bosses. They just need to actually integrate them into the main parts of the story. For example, putting them in the actual dungeons. There's nothing wrong with optional hard bosses, but when your main bosses aren't great, optional ones shouldn't feel like the focus. Before I move on to the next category, I want to mention a small issue with the way the game handled enemy scaling for multiplayer. Health scaling in Grounded 1 is dynamic. The more people fight a monster, the more health it has. This is a great system. It makes splitting up and indulging in solo expeditions a viable way of playing. You can safely explore without your party without having to worry about mega buffed enemies. There was, however, a small issue with how the game handled adjusting health halfway through a fight. If a player joins your fight late, the boss effectively heals, which doesn't feel very good. In Grounded 2, I hope that instead of scaling health, they scale defense. This would essentially have the same effect, but without your teammates actively healing the enemy. The garden in Grounded 1 is split into two separate parts, the lower garden and the upper garden. In theory, this is a wonderful system. It allows them to open up the world throughout the game and recreate some of the wonder felt when first starting, while also clearly separating the difficulty of the two zones. The hardest lower garden enemies are terrifying right up until you see the basic enemies of the upper garden. However, in practice, the balance here feels a bit off. The upper garden never stops being incredibly hostile, forcing you to frequently fight multiple strong enemies at the same time, while the lower garden becomes almost empty feeling as the game goes on. To blame for this is probably the first game's very aggressive early access update schedule, which they mention they've relaxed for Grounded 2, with less frequent, bigger updates, which should lead to much better pacing. In Grounded 2, I'd like to see the system expanded on, with more layers and a more gradual increase in difficulty. Maybe even some more events, like plugging the gas leak in Grounded 1, which spread more difficult enemies into lower difficulty areas. But enough of that shit, let's get to the important part. I want to explore a kitchen. I know they've talked about not wanting to do indoor spaces out of fear of them feeling too empty, but I really think there's many ways to mitigate that issue and implement a kitchen in a great way, and a good example can be found in none other than Dark Souls. In Anor Londo, FromSoft built a massive space, but cleverly, they keep you on a single path far above the city streets. Now imagine for a second, the streets being the floor, and the path being a kitchen counter. There's many ways to keep the player from getting to the floor. Gas, obstacles, blah blah blah. But a cool path towards gatekeeping the floor I want to propose is more so inspired by Sen's Fortress. Turn the ground into a boss arena. Put something like a rat down there, big, fast, and meant to be fought mounted. An indoor space could be a perfect way to show off mounted combat. More on that later. Make it scary, make it intimidating, so players know not to mess with that thing. Not only would it make for a memorable encounter, but it would also finally give us a kitchen. Just imagine the joy of hiking across a giant kitchen counter. The options for new obstacles and resources you can find here are endless. But much more important to me than the overworld are the dungeons. In Grounded 1, these range from boring to okay, with some occasional standouts like the Pond Lab. It largely suffered from similar issues to the recent Zelda games, with all dungeons feeling far too samey. Just to illustrate this, I'll quickly show you a series of images taken in different labs. You tell me if you can tell them apart. The lead-ups to the dungeons sometimes even eclipse the actual dungeons here, like in the gas lab, which forces you to fight your way through a massive unique toxic area with tough enemies, only to end up in the same style of lab you've seen a million fucking times facing the worst fucking boss in the game. or the pond lab, which has you dive deep down into the pond to find a lab that is partially submerged. While the basic lab parts still look the same, this lab uses the environment in a way that is far more interesting than many others, with doors leading to the outside and diving sections. I'm really hoping that Grounded 2 uses this lab specifically as a jumping off point to create more interesting and varied dungeons that really use and match their environments. I'm also hoping for less non-killable wildlife. I really did not enjoy not being able to kill the crow, and would greatly appreciate being able to either kill bigger creatures or not have them be interactable at all. It would already be enough for me to have them die after a ridiculous amount of hits like this big dragon in Elden Ring. I don't even need some fancy fight. Although that would be cool. I don't like the idea of late game mounts being a straight upgrade to earlier ones. Rather, every mount should fill a special role with none of them being inherently better than others, instead fulfilling different functions. One could, for example, assist with building, others with combat, water traversal, storage, exploration, or climbing. Spider mounts certainly should be able to climb up walls to whatever extent the devs think is reasonable. It could also augment one of my favorite parts of Grounded's combat, summoning, which I will elaborate more on in a later video. In the first game, this mostly involved putting on a mutation or armor that allowed for summoning, and then hitting the enemy as much as possible, as every hit carried a chance of increasing the might of your bug army by adding an additional soldier. Mounts could slot into the system seamlessly. They could come with summoning abilities or even fight alongside your summons. There could be a mount that allows you to heal and extend the life of your bug army, sort of like the Ant Queen staffs in the first game. I would even be okay with them mostly getting rid of the pet system and rolling its uses into mounts. Pets in the first game felt far too weak. They didn't even do very much and died far too quickly. An updated system that combines mounts with pets could fix this. I am, however, a bit worried about mounted combat limiting your abilities too much. And I really hope they fill it with a decent amount of complexity. I want the mounts to feel like an extension of my build, rather than a completely different, less interesting build that relies mostly on spectacle, like Mario Odyssey's possessions. Building and crafting should remain a major part of the game's progression. The Monster Hunter style, kill enemies to get their parts to then kill stronger enemies using those parts progression, worked beautifully for the first game, and I really hope this remains as excellent in Grounded 2. In fact, I'd love for them to lean even more into it. The Omni tool mentioned on the Steam page, however, worries me a bit in this aspect. As slowly working your way towards being able to craft powerful axes, shovels, and hammers really helped Grounded 1's pacing. And replacing all of that with a single tool feels counter to the much bigger world and game they have shown off, as it ironically weakens and limits probably the biggest tool the devs had to gauge your progression. But I'm hoping my worries will disappear as soon as I get my hands on the game. I'm especially excited to get my hands on the updated building system, as building in Grounded 1 had some major issues. Several resources, like for example feathers, charcoal, acorns, or pine cones, felt far too rare, existing only in limited quantities and taking what felt like years to respawn. It felt almost punishing to build bigger bases, as most of your time was spent waiting for resources to just come back. In Grounded 2, I want them to increase both the quantity and respawn rate of most resources, maybe even using more player-controlled ways of farming where applicable. In Grounded 1, you could build small planters that allowed you to grow various materials, for example used for crafting health potions and late game walls. While extremely useful, it feels like more could be done with a system like this, maybe even going so far as to include animal bug husbandry in some form. It would certainly fit the inclusion of mounts this time around. The kind of farms this farming system encouraged also looked a bit goofy, as farms mostly devolved into long rows of individual planters. It would be wonderful to combine them in some way that looks a bit more functional. Another big problem with building was proper alignment of objects. It was nearly impossible to do. The grid in Grounded 1 was inconsistent and finicky, and despite being a massive part of the game, it felt weirdly unpolished. It was frustrating, it was horrible. Objects refused to go in the right place, sometimes refused to be placed down at all unless you resort to a mix of Tetris, T-spinning, and blood magic. Putting chairs at tables was especially bad. funnily enough. Grounded 2 desperately needs to fix this. It was a constant annoyance and not fun at all to work around. I'm on my knees begging the devs to implement a proper grid system that can toggle on and off, with objects that actually want to sit next to each other. To conclude my rambling, I just want more Grounded. And I hope Grounded 2 can be just that, more grounded, but this time with a kitchen.